Hi Vikings! Welcome back to this week's broadcast. I'm Annabelle.
And I'm Kensley, and we have a very special video about Veterans Day.
We'll hear from the choir and band along with an interview from Dr. Edwards, who served in the National Guard.
We will also hear from current students and staff about what Veterans Day means to them.
To start us off, let's watch a short video explaining Veterans Day.
You probably know that every year on November 11th, Americans celebrate Veterans Day to honor the millions of men and women who have served or are serving in the nation's armed forces. But bet you didn't know the whole story behind the holiday. For starters, it wasn't originally called Veterans Day, but Armistice Day, to commemorate the truce signed between the Allies and Germany in World War I on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. The first Armistice Day in the U.S. was celebrated on November 11th, 1919. All business was suspended for 2 minutes starting at 11 a.m., and parades and public gatherings were held to commemorate the occasion. Later, America also began honoring its unknown soldiers on Armistice Day, a tradition that continues today. At 11 a.m. every Veterans Day, a color guard ceremony represents all branches of the military at the Tomb of the Unknowns in Arlington National Cemetery. In 1954, the name was changed to Veterans Day, following a national campaign to have the day honor all veterans, not just those who served in World War I. And did you know, for 7 years, Veterans Day was actually celebrated in October? In 1968, Congress moved Veterans Day to the fourth Monday in October so that government employees could enjoy a long weekend. But in 1975, President Gerald Ford returned Veterans Day to November 11th due to the historical significance, and that's where it sits on the calendar today. And do you know the difference between Memorial Day and Veterans Day? Both of them honor those men and women who have served in the military, but Memorial Day honors America's war dead, while Veterans Day honors all American veterans, living and dead. The U.S. Census Bureau estimates that there are currently over 21 million living military veterans in the United States. More than 16 million of these served during times of war, while 5.5 million served during peacetime only. So this Veterans Day, don't forget to say thanks to some of the millions of men and women who have served our country.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare amongst bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Thank you to Mr. Reeldahl, Mr. Hansen, and Gold Tones for the amazing performance of the national anthem.
We really are blessed to live in the land of the free.
And the home of the brave.
Now let's hear from Dr. Edwards, who served in the National Guard.
I was for 8 years in the Army Reserve, and that consisted of 1 weekend a month through that 8 years, as well as 2 weeks in the summer. In the summer, I spent time at Fort Riley, Kansas, Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, Fort Knox, Kentucky. And when we went to Fort Knox, our unit basically went over and took over basic training for a group that was sent overseas. So for 2 weeks, we went in and served as the drill sergeants for that training unit, and I had a group of about 118, 120 privates that had just enlisted in the military. I joined the United States Army Reserve when I was a senior in high school in 1988. So I joined in a field artillery unit out of Lansing, Michigan. And the summer of 1988, I went to boot camp in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And I started the first week of July, so it was nice and warm. And then I did my basic and advanced training at Fort Sill, all in one 16-week stretch. So I spent July to November in Fort Sill. And then when I returned back to Michigan, I had enrolled at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. So I transferred to a unit in Lincoln, Nebraska that was a 19 Delta or a Cav Scouts drill sergeant unit. So as I started college in January of 1989, I started my reserve unit there, where we met 1 weekend a month and then 2 weeks in the summer. Through the course of my military service, I've gone through a lot of leadership training, ANOC, BNOC, spent a lot of time at Fort Riley, Kansas. Our drill sergeant unit's responsibility was to go to Fort Hood, Texas, and take over the training if the units from Fort Hood got sent overseas, which at the time was Desert Storm and the cleanup after that. So when I graduated from college in 1992, I got a job in Kansas, so I moved to a unit down in Ponca City, Oklahoma, which was an 11 Bravo or an infantry unit. So I went through more training to become an infantry person. That was part of some of the unit shutdowns and closures of bases across the United States at that time. So that unit in Ponca City, as soon as I was trained, ended up getting closed. So I was transferred to a unit in Wichita, Kansas. That was a truck driving unit. So I went through truck driving school, and then I'd completed my 8 years of U.S. Army Reserve training. When I moved to Kansas, I had, obviously I was married and had two children. And then our third one was born when we moved back to Nebraska, and that was part of the reason that I got out of the service. So a lot of units were getting called up at that time, so we just balanced family life with service, and at that point in time we made the decision to get out of the military.
Thank you to Dr. Edwards for taking the time to talk with us.
Now, let's hear from the best band in the land, performing Salute to America's Finest, the official songs of all the U.S. military branches.
Unfortunately, we know we are missing some of our veterans, but as each song plays, we will display a photo of Northwest alumni in uniform for their respective branch. Thank you, Mr. Fansteel and the Northwest Band for playing such a powerful piece.
And thank you, Northwest alumni, for your service and commitment to America.
Now, let's talk to some current students and staff about what Veterans Day means to them.
Hi Vikings, welcome back to this week's Viking in the Village. I'm Annabelle.
And I'm Sienna, and this week we'll be asking teachers
And students.
what Veterans Day means to them. What does Veterans Day mean to you?
Veterans Day to me means we take at least one day of the year to thank the veterans for all their sacrifice and service that they provided to us and to the country. Sometimes I think we often don't give it enough thought. The word veteran kind of gives the meaning that they are not in active combat anymore or in an active role, actively serving the military or the country. But I would kind of argue that because often I think that a veteran many times has gone back to the war that they may have fought last night. Many times our veterans go back to the war that they fought in their dreams that they have in their nightmares. Sometimes I believe that we don't necessarily think of that. We look at Veterans Day as a nice opportunity to tell them thank you for their sacrifice, but often the sacrifice is so much more than what we ever think it might be.
I have a couple family members who have served, more specifically in the Navy. My great-grandpa welded airplanes on ships in the Pacific Ocean, and my great-uncle was a chef in the Navy. And he would talk about how he'd go into Vietnam and give candy to the kids there. And both my parents work at the VA, so, we're a very veteran welcoming family, and just can't thank them enough for their service.
Veterans Day is a time in which we can thank all the veterans who've served this great country. They've given us our rights, our freedoms, and those who continue to serve and help us maintain the great country that we have.
Veterans Day means just a day to recognize everyone who gave everything in service of this country, in service of the freedoms that we have here. To me, it's a day to recognize those that have served, those that have fallen, those that are still alive, to carry on the tradition of the veterans that came before them. I had a couple of grandparents that both served in the United States Armed Forces, and so it's a day, even if they don't bring it up, if they don't celebrate it a lot, that I can think back to their selfless gift that they gave to me just by serving, and I can recognize that. I can honor them for that, and I can just simply thank them for their service.
Veterans Day means a lot to me because I've had a lot of family members that have been in the military and sacrificed everything. My mom was in the Air Force for 23 years, and it just means a lot because I've had a lot of family members that sacrificed things.
Veterans Day means a lot to me because I think of the sacrifice that all the soldiers made, either through the time away from their families or for those who ultimately gave up the sacrifice of life for saving our freedoms and our way of life.
We appreciate all current and former Northwest students for sharing their thoughts on Veterans Day,
as well as all of our veterans who have served our nation.
Thank you all for watching this very special broadcast. I'm Kensley.
And I'm Annabelle.
God bless America.